Hello, everyone. I'm here with Kyle Morrison again. Kyle, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. We're doing a follow up. We had a conversation before the election in 2024. Now that's over and done. We're recording this in January, and we're going to talk about it. Kyle, what do you think?
I think I sort of said a few things in our last conversation about my thoughts and predictions. I'll say that I'm not surprised about the Electoral College. As we got closer, I was one of the individuals that was predicting a Trump victory via Electoral College. I am surprised about the popular vote. That one did take me by surprise. And I think it does show a significant shift in voter feelings. I've had a few conversations with some people that I interviewed prior, part of my the original project, and that also is the same feelings as well. And I think it's going to be an interesting next 4 years, particularly with the Supreme Court ruling on presidential power, and that I feel like at this point, Trump has nothing to lose in terms of pushing the boundaries of presidential power because this is the second term.
Yes, absolutely. So let's get started with the popular vote. A number of our listeners would be pretty familiar with why it might be considered unusual for Donald Trump to have won the popular vote. But can you start giving a little bit of context for why that was surprising for you?
Yeah, so can't remember. I think it was it one of the Bush presidencies that had the last time a Republican candidate has won the popular vote.
The 2004 election with George W. Bush, so that's Bush Jr., his second term, was the only time since 1992 that a Republican candidate has won the popular vote.
But yeah, it's been a while. For the context of this election, I'm still trying to dig into it. I think political analysts are also doing the same. The question is, how much of it was a shift in voter, or how much was it a change in voter turnout? And the fact is, I think that we saw a massive shift in areas, even like liberal areas, like states like New York and California, where we saw voter trends shift more to the right, which seemed to indicate to me that I think, and this is also coming from conversations I've had, that the Democrats have, no, unsurprisingly, lost the support of the working class. In particular, the big shift, I think, is white working class. And that the feeling has been that they have not shown that they've done anything to improve conditions. There's been a focus on social issues, which is great for keeping the support of younger voters, but middle white working class voter, I think this election showed that topics like immigration and the economy, despite spout that the economy is doing well in the United States, which it is certainly doing better, that the feelings and lived experiences were not matching what was being told.
Hmm. What you're saying makes a lot of sense about the shifts within the party and this change in perspective. Why do you think this happened?
I think there are a few reasons. I think that the Democratic Party has historically enacted policies that do benefit, has benefited, I think, particularly working class union families. However, I'm seeing this with, for example, the anti-union sentiment. But I think that the toll of inflation, the impact that COVID has left on the economy, the shifts in how things, a globalized economy and the closing of factories, and the fact that companies, no matter who's in charge, are exporting labor overseas, all have played this toll. And I think what's happened from the Democratic standpoint is it's become a lot of empty words and empty promises. And so when someone like Donald Trump comes up, which really focuses on the populist rhetoric, that he doesn't tell you how he's going to fix it. He just confirms your feelings that it's broken. And it's the confirmation and affirmation piece. I think before we started, I told you I'm working in organizing right now, and that's the core component of how you organize is you affirm, you don't dispute, you always affirm, and you say, Yeah, absolutely. I feel that. So I think what Trump and the Republican Party now, under Trump, has been doing is saying, you're right, everything is terrible. You're right, the economy is horrible. You're right, immigrants are taking your job. You're right, all of this. And the Democrats, especially, I think we saw with Kamala Harris's campaign, said, actually, no, the economy is doing well. And I don't think people responded well to that. And I think this is something that the Democrats need to terms with that. I think they were counting on Roe v. Wade to bring out support. That worked in the midterms. I don't think it carried out here. I think that they need to reassess what they're doing in terms of economic policies that directly not just benefit, but people are able to see an immediate impact. How they do that, though, I'm not 100% sure. I think it's going to take time, though. Will take at least the next 4 years for them to do it.
You're saying that, and tell me if I'm summarizing this wrong, but that you feel like Trump connected with people emotionally, which validated their sense that something's wrong, whereas the Democrats, there was more of a correction in the fine tuning on how things were wrong, or a here, let's do this proposal to be able to solve this problem, as opposed to just sticking in the emotion of something's wrong. Is that right, or am I off in what you're trying to say?
On the head there, exactly. Yeah, I think that's, and to be fair to the Democrats, Harris was put in a very difficult situation where she was put in a situation where she had to, in a way, support what Biden was doing, even though what Biden was doing was not popular with the Democratic Party or some voters at the time. And it was kind of, I felt that it seemed like almost a no-win situation. I think that if the Democrats had had a primary, and I think if Biden had stepped down earlier and they had had time, I think we might have seen something different. But that's exactly right. It's emotions and populist rhetoric historically been the cornerstones of success for any sort of authoritarian-like leader. Even not to say Trump is an authoritarian leader. I think he has elements of authoritarianism, but I wouldn't classify him strictly as that. But certainly as a populist leader, that's one of the best ways to win support is emotions. People will resonate with emotions much more than facts. I can tell you facts all day, but you're going to, more often than not, you'll emotionally, how you'll react will be how you will end up voting or how you end up making decisions.
So to what extent do you think Donald Trump has proposed solutions? I mean, obviously he's not like a policy whiz. That just isn't the type of person type of politician Donald Trump has been. Like pretty famously in the 2020 election, he ran on no policy. It was just like, basically it was Trump. So on that level, it does seem like it's almost, it is the feel. It's like running on the personality almost. But then that, I think, lends to what you're saying of that's presenting the narrative as an emotion. Though some of his articulations of the problems, I think, do seem to present certain ways of thinking about the problems. You know, immigration is a problem, and that's a big reason why the economy is bad. That might be something he articulates emotionally, but there is a type of, I don't know if policy is the right word because it's not that detailed, but there is a type of, here's the problem and here's a solution within that. Or what do you think? How do you conceptualize this?
I think you said, Trump's policy is, what does Trump want and what can Trump get? I think that of the many things that he has said at 3 a.m. on X or Twitter or at rallies, immigration, I think, is the only thing that there seems to be some kind of plan. I think we're actually already seeing a shift for those who are listening now, the Senate House just passed a bill to curb immigration or to deport migrants after minor crimes. We're seeing a shift in Democratic voter behavior. This is something that was not supported previously. So I do think the Democrats are seeing that. Trump's ability to close the border or seeking to shut down the border, will he be able to shut it down day one? I don't know. He'll probably try a few executive orders. I suspect they'll be challenged, and we'll have the same thing that we had before, where we'll probably end up almost status quo. I think we will see a lessening of illegal immigration because of individual's choice, not necessarily Trump's policies, but I think the fear of deportation will curb migrants. There's already been talk from individuals who are saying they're probably less likely to try and immigrate at this point. The economy, here's where it could be tricky. Every economic specialist has said that things like tariffs are a terrible idea. Tariffs will hurt everyone. I'm hoping that this is him just trying to strong arm negotiations. Is it a good tactic? I wouldn't do it. I mean, trade wars never end well for anyone. And as we know, most of the things he said is completely wrong anyway, or not wrong, but certainly over exaggerated and they're not really based in facts. But as we've said, doesn't need to be based in facts as long as people believe it. Joseph Goebbels, infamous propaganda minister for the Nazi Party, repeat a lie enough times that it becomes truth. And that's what Trump has done, and to great effect. But in terms of his policy, I think the immigration one will be the one we see the most direct impact. Economics, we'll see. I've got a couple predictions on that. The prediction one is nothing changes and that we're still going to be in the same economic situation, in which case voters will quickly turn on Trump, or it goes radically up or down. We will see what that happens. I do have some concerns, though. My biggest concerns, though, are in terms of his policies are the cutting of budgets like Department of Education, natural resources, national parks. Those are, I think, the things that we'll see the most immediate damage being done to.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So it seems like part of what you're saying is he gives a very emotional narrative and is a bit loose on any actual plans, though maybe there's one or two core issues that he does seem very keen on. And I remember listening to a political analyst. I think he pointed to both the two you highlighted, both immigration as one that Donald Trump has like very historically, even prior to being a political figure in 2015, had a very strong stance on, and that and in the tariffs and trade restrictions that you talked about. You were beginning to get into this, but what's your take on an upcoming second Donald Trump presidency? What are the biggest things you're looking out for, and what are some of your biggest concerns?
My biggest concerns this time is that, first off, the Republicans now hold control of both the House and the Senate. So there's not as many checks. I'm concerned about the limits of presidential power with the ruling from the Supreme Court. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will not see the end of all democracy as we know it, but I'm also wary that I think he will try to push the limits of executive power. I suspect what we will see is him trying to pardon himself and go after anyone who has attempted to prosecute him for his crimes. I suspect we will see some political retribution against those individuals. I'm expecting to see him try to give additional power to his close allies. Those are kind of the immediate things that I see him doing. I suspect to go overseas, I suspect we may see a change or shift in the Russia-Ukraine war, although, again, it depends on how the Senate and House feel about that and how much they're willing to stand up to Trump. And the other thing I'm looking out for is the budget. We saw that a really interesting phenomenon in the most recent almost near government shutdown, where the Speaker of the House defied Trump and passed a budget proposal that Trump originally tried to shut down. But Trump has been pushing to remove the cap on the deficit. Fiscal Republicans have for a long time said that they're never going to do that. And so it's really at odds with the fiscal platform of the Republican Party. Come when that deal expires and when they need to vote on a new budget, Trump's shown that he's willing to shut down the government. I think that's going to be something that's going to clash dramatically with your traditional fiscal Republicans is the fiscal issue.
I think I share a similar degree of uncertainty, but also trying to look for what he did in the past. This is the time when there's a lot of discussion about, for a while there's a lot of discussion about, who's going to be appointed to cabinet positions and how is he going to develop the administration within the White House around him. What's your perspective on this?
It's really interesting, and that's a good question, because what we're starting to see is this shift in move away from your career politician. For example, we have Elon Musk, who is running the Department of Government Efficiency, who, I mean, in terms of his style, will clash with Trump on a couple issues, but also should not be running any form of government. Musk is not the person for that. Several other people with no experience at all being appointed to positions strictly because Trump knows that they're loyalists. I have concerns. Fortunately, it's not the same as a Supreme Court nomination, which is a lifetime appointment. So worst case scenario, these people are gone in a few years. And I'm also curious about Vance, because Vance was someone who previously did not support Trump and has switched positions. So I'm wondering where Vance really does sit, if he's playing the political card to just further his political career, or if he really has drank the Kool-Aid, so to say. I don't think he's quite on the same level as Marjorie Taylor Greene, but if he's just playing the Trump card and, he's a politician, he knows how to win audiences in that regard, then maybe that's why he's sort of saying what he is right now.
Honestly, that's also a question I have with Elon Musk. Yeah, it's a very good point. This is something to watch. Like you talked about, maybe they would be in there for only a few years. And I mean, ironically, if last term is any precedent, some of them could be gone by the end of this year.
Exactly.
The longevity in Trump's cabinet just wasn't the thing last time. It does seem like there's a shift in emphasis towards towing the line, which is a bit of a different, because like the last time around, a lot of the positions were like, here are the policy experts in this area, versus now it seems to be the criteria is loyalty to Donald Trump. Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think now positions are loyalty to Donald Trump. My gut feeling, and this is based not on any fact, this is just on gut feeling, is that there will be, particularly when we come to things like fiscal issues, a little pushback. And I think part of what's going to come down to is how the electorals feel in their position as a member of House or Senate, where if they know if they, vote to do away with the debt limit or debt ceiling, then they're getting voted out of office because they come from a more fiscal conservative area. So I think that the positions you mentioned, you said, we may have a new press secretary in 2 weeks. We don't know. Those are positions I think we'll see will be a lot more Trump loyalist. And then I think some of the House and Senate, I think they're going to be reading the room. Saw where they're willing to have some pushback, to have a majority, but it's a very narrow one. So there's not a lot to work with. I think that's something to watch on that end.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
I also wanted to ask about the Democratic Party.
What do you think of the current discussions within the Democratic Party since the election? And you were getting into this at the very beginning of our conversation, but what do you think the Democrats should do?
So first and foremost, yeah, I think that the Democrats need to realize that they can't rely on identity politics. I think that, for example, the Democrats have previously relied on Black voter population groups. We saw they're starting to lose this core because I think what we're seeing is the question of Black voters saying things like, well, the Democratic Party hasn't done anything for me. The Republican Party hasn't done anything for me. The Democrats are in charge right now. So why not I just try something different? And I think that's something that the Democrats need to realize is they need to actually begin to do more than lip service to their constituents. I also think the Democrats need to honestly start playing the game the way, if they want to succeed in Congress, play the game the way the Republicans have been playing. I know it's not what we think about as the common good, but Mitch McConnell, when he was leader of the Senate, he would happily filibuster everything just to make sure that they didn't get a win. And I think that that's something the Democrats need to think about. Trump's re-election here, I think, has shown us that politics as it used to be is no more. We're shifting to a new This has been exemplified by the 24-hour news cycle in which people forget what happened 2 weeks ago. It's what happened in the last 48 hours that is going to catch the attention. I think the Republicans have known this. They're focusing on, we can do something really bad and people will forget it by the time it's time to vote. And I think Democrats have that to some extent. They're certainly not the angels either, but I think that's something they need to think of. On a more concrete level, though, I think they need to reconnect with the white working class voter. They've been trying to toe this line where they're trying to get support of, let's call them the young activist voter, the one that is marching in protests, the one that is rallying for trans rights, the ones that are out there, your college voters, while also trying to court the support of your, working class, middle-aged voter. And what they're ended up doing, I think, is they're not far enough to the left for the young voter, and the middle-aged voter is saying we don't really care about those issues, focus on the economy, and the Republican is promising easier solutions to that. They may not be good ones, but they're easier solutions, or that affirmation that I mentioned before. So I think what they really need to do is they need to pick a path, and I think they need to decide, are we going to focus our platform on, we are the progressive socialist party and embrace that, or do they need to focus on and say, we're not, because the far right has united again, and this is something we talked about on a previous one. It's a lot easier to unite over hate than it is over agreement. As long as we can agree that we both dislike the same group, it doesn't matter if we hate everything else about each other. We both hate the other person more, or we both think the other person is more. And things like abortion, things like immigration, these are things that have that. Religion as well is a big one in that. So it doesn't matter our differences. It doesn't matter if I'm a racist and I think that white people are better. As long as we both agree that that person over there is even worse, I can say, all right, you know what? I'm going to put that aside for right now because you will agree with me. It's a lot different if we're trying to find an agreement of saying, we both want this and we both want to do that and get together and work together on that, but we're also fighting against this intolerance. And so it becomes you don't like what I also like. So since you don't also like this, that means you're a fascist and I don't like you. And I think that's something that the left has struggled with. And so I think that's the conversation Democrats need to have is, who's their target audience? We saw with Harris being endorsed by some moderate Republicans, and I think trying to re-emulate what Biden successfully did, which was shift some moderate Republicans to his side. But I think, and some of the research I did supports this, was a lot of that was not necessarily support for Biden, but it was the fact that they were voting against Trump. And I think that in this case, it may have been a voting against Biden and willing to give Trump another try, or that Harris didn't come up with enough concrete solutions that made her the better alternative of someone who, through this concept we talk about, this idea of, it's called collective amnesia, in which there's this sense of only selectively or selective amnesia, remembering certain facts while forgetting others. And this is a phenomenon we see quite frequently, is remembering, hey, at one point the economy was really good during the first Trump presidency, but forgetting everything else, forgetting COVID-19, forgetting the political unrest, forgetting all of the other horrible things that he did during that first presidency, and just remembering that one thing. And through that reinforcement of telling, right now the economy is terrible, I had the best economy when I was president, that's reinforced that. So that's what I would say Democrats first need to do, is they need to figure out their message. And I think figure out an avenue they want to go with and focus on that. And then promise and propose real solutions that are firm of the current beliefs, that say that, yes, things right now are really bad. And it's easier when you're not the incumbent, because right now you're saying that our party, our platform is doing really well. And I think they were trying to fight against the message in which people felt it really wasn't. So I think next election, we might see a shift back. I think depending on how Trump's presidency goes, if Trump does not deliver, My gut says that there's a good feeling that there could be a shift back. It just depends on who the next candidate is and who the Democrats put forward as well.
On the very last thing you said, the economy was one of the key
Yeah.
things that Trump ran on. We're going to keep inflation down. You were saying this at the very beginning, but some of his suggestions might very well raise inflation. So like I could see, and people might remember the chaos of a Trump presidency too, but like some of the exact things might directly backfire and almost cause a whiplash to what you're saying that might change the game later on. At least in my mind, a core thing about the Democratic Party is that in its strategy in the last several years, and it was very apparent in the 2024 election, was okay. So the Republican Party under Donald Trump have very much narrowed who their focus is. They've honed in, this is the population that he tries to get. The Democrats, part of their strategy has been to pick up everybody else, ranging from heavily progressive individual to, well, the people we were talking about before, the moderate conservatives or the never Trumpers like the Liz Cheneys. You were talking about sometimes rallying behind an enemy can be very galvanizing. Some level of that enemy this election was Donald Trump, but at the same time, it's hard to speak very emotionally to all of those audiences, because if you speak to the visceral things that people in each of those audiences feel, if you try to pick the enemies of one of these different sides, it's going to be the other people you're trying to bring into the tent. And so you end up basically falling into platitudes, because that's about the closest you can get to a mode of language that would appeal to this entire big tent audience. What are your thoughts?
I think you're absolutely correct. And I think that's what we saw. If we go back and listen to some of the debate or what Harris was saying, it was exactly that. It was trying to appease and redirect what was very standard for in politics and political debates before Trump, the trying to appease everyone and trying to anger no one. Trump didn't care if he angered a whole bunch of people because he knew he had a whole bunch of people he was appeasing. Trump doesn't care if the left absolutely hates him, if the moderates hate him. His ego might, but in terms of his support, he knows that he has diehard supporters that are at this point are willing to ignore all logic, quite secure in that base. And so he just had to shift the dial a little bit. Harris did not, and the Democratic Party did not. It did have a base of, we will do everything in power to vote against Trump, but the question was, and I'm waffling on whether this was the case here, how many of those individuals showed up to vote, and how many of those individuals showed up in places where it mattered to vote? Because you have a massive turnout in California and New York, but not Pennsylvania, Georgia, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a shift across the United States. And I think what you said is absolutely correct. You can't appease everyone. You can't make everyone happy. And I think trying to do so was one of the downfalls, in addition to, honestly, just the current situations, and that I think Biden did not deliver what people wanted. And I think people wanted a quick fix, and Biden wasn't able to deliver that. So it was very difficult to say that as the vice president of someone who people didn't really like at that time, I'm going to do something different. So there are a couple factors in that.
Yeah, I could definitely see what you're saying. I do see factors in both, and also things like inflation is historically a bit of a political hot potato to whichever party happens to be in the presidency at the time. They get blamed for it, even though it's often based off of global dynamics and other things that are basically beyond their control. The other thing I was thinking about, and based off of what you said before, I wanted to ask a little more details on. You were talking about how you feel like the Democrats need to adjust to match this more contemporary era around communication, and you were talking about like the 48 hours. What happens in the last 48 hours is what people base their decision off of. What this reminds me of, I've heard analysts talk about in different eras of mass communication in the United States, you see different presidents arise. So like the TV comes in, and then you get John F. Kennedy, whose style really works for television. I mean, that was one reason, like, he significantly beat Nixon in the first televised debate. And you can kind of keep going in each almost new era of communication. Get Ronald Reagan with things like his fireside chats. I've heard people talk about, like, Donald Trump is able to exploit the social media era much more successfully. What are your thoughts on what running a successful campaign looks like now?
I absolutely agree. And there's an entire book called The Language of Trump that talks about exactly this. The Trump's language and style of communication. It's a ramble of words that doesn't make sense at times, but it works very well for 100 and something characters, all caps, and it works very well for quick messages that you can send out. I'll give him credit for where credit is due. He's very good at that. You mentioned Reagan. Reagan famously said, even still same era, but Reagan was one of our most, in terms of performative, we call it the term used by anthropologists, the idea of a political sociodrama being a performance, so that it's a ritual that people are participating in and feel a part of, and feel part of a social group. And Reagan was famous for this, leading the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. And you mentioned Kennedy as well, same thing. And Trump, I think, has dominated the social media platform of this era. For the Democrats at this point, if they want to focus on the younger voters, I think that that's what that's going to look like. It's going to rely on social media platforms, Instagram, but I think it's going to be connecting on those levels. If your focus is on younger voters, I think you really need to focus on college campuses, but that's not going to win you as much support in rural areas that you need. And I think that's going to look at boots on the ground organizing. I know that there was a huge phone banking campaign for Harris. I know there was for Trump as well. And they had two different styles of organizing. And it's hard to know if one style led to success or not. But I also would say I think some of these conversations need to happen earlier on, because once someone's locked in with their decision, it's very difficult to sway them. And again, this also was difficult with how quickly this campaign, early on, I was very curious because the US famously has a very long campaign cycle in comparison to places like Canada, the UK, where they're very short. I was wondering if this would work to Harris's advantage, but I think in this instance it did not, because it did not have time to develop a clear campaign message.
One of the ironies is it seemed like Harris was the most popular a couple months in. It was like a month or two in, I think somewhere around September or something like that. She was leading in the polls. It kind of started to wane after that. So I wonder if the election happened right then, if that would be the ideal length for her to have the election after that time.
Yeah, I think so too. It's always hard to say with those sort of post-change bumps we see after debates and everything that, it depends on who was being polled at that time. And that's why early on I actually thought, there might be a chance. But then I began to see the polls well, and that's where my prediction shifted. My take on this is that Harris failed to separate herself from the Biden administration. She failed to deliver and reading some of the interviews from people who were from New York Times, undecided voters, she failed to win them over. They were looking for a plan of how this is going to be different from what the past 4 years, and she didn't provide that. I think if right out of the gate she'd come out with that same energy, said, we're bringing about change. She ran very much on, you don't have to settle with going backwards. You don't have to say that. But she didn't provide here's my economic policy that is radically different from Biden, and here are the things that I'm going to do radically different from Biden, and here is how I'm going to change this, and here's a completely different plan. This is going to provide hope and change, and this is how we're going to fix the economic problem that we're currently in, because, we're not in a great situation right now, and you know what? I'm going to fix that. And I think that message might have been a lot better. The Biden administration has done a very good job with the economy. And again, it's one of these things where it's hard to falter right away. It's difficult if you're currently the vice president and you're saying that the president is not doing a good job. And it's difficult when I think Biden kind of threw her in a ditch by not stepping down earlier. She did not have time to develop a clear campaign strategy and a clear message until later on. And I think by that point, people had stopped listening.
It seemed like Kamala Harris tried to, and given the broadness of the Democratic Party, both appeal to those who liked Biden's presidency and those who were significantly disgruntled by Biden's presidency. I saw that pulling in both directions. I think that was also a big factor in not being able to answer to those who wanted to hear, what are you going to do differently, because they were very critical of Biden. And then I thought most undecided voters tended to be pretty critical of Biden. One other question I wanted to ask, what have you learned as the data around this election comes in? What have you learned as an anthropologist and as somebody who has been studying U.S. politics? And what have you learned about demographic shifts within the United States?
We saw this, and this isn't probably anything new. I think Latin American populations are still continuing to shift to the right. Learning, again, that, to re-echo what I've said, that the white working class voter is getting tired of being told that you can't say this, you can't do that. I think the sort of identity politics is coming back to bite some of the Democratic Party, but it's also, that's what's keeping some of the far left in tow. Having spoken with one of my interlocutors, I think really that's the big thing, is people getting angry about, you can't say his, him, she, her without saying they, them, and that people will come after you if you do. I think that this is something that should continue to be a goal for the Democratic Party, to be inclusive, to provide protection for trans rights. I think it needs to be done in a way that doesn't alienate voters. And I think to some degree that's been happening. And I think it's causing alienation. And I don't know how you do that, because no matter what, you're going to upset someone. But I think they need to decide which group is their demographic that they need. That's really what I have learned, I think, from this, is it's going to be a wake-up call. I think that they really need to think about how things are going to be done the next 4 years. And we'll see. I think we've talked about it before. We said that it's very possible come midterms we see a massive shift back. If things are still really terrible, the Trump voter will never, the far right Trump won't shift, I do not think. I think that there is the voter that hoped that Trump would bring about some sort of promises. And as we see now, the House and Senate, the Republicans have full control. So for the voter, I don't think there's any excuse of we have to blame them. For example, I have spoken with some folks and some friends that blamed Biden for the repeal of Roe v. Wade because Biden was president when that happened. Didn't connect the dots that it was Trump who appointed the Supreme Court nominations that then led to that decision. But Biden was in charge when that happened, so Biden got blamed for that. This is someone who I've spoken with that has a PhD, is quite intelligent, is very smart, but doesn't necessarily very closely follow U.S. politics. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I very, very likely is the case across the United States. So your average person doesn't spend the amount of time that we spend reading political analyst reports and talking about U.S. politics. It's what they hear and what they remember. And if you remember, Roe v. Wade got overturned during the Biden presidency, well, it's Biden's fault. If you remember that COVID-19 was happening and lockdowns were happening, it's Biden's fault we had these lockdowns and COVID-19, and I blame Biden for this. It doesn't matter that Trump was the one that was president when COVID started and didn't take action and led to thousands of unnecessary deaths and promoted an anti-vax campaign. And it doesn't matter. Biden got blamed. And I think that's what's going to happen now is whoever's in power gets the blame, and we'll see what happens the next 4 years. I'm a little worried.
People's implied concept is that the government is in effective dictatorship. When you talk to regular people, and some of that is the details of the checks and balances and what the different parts of government do can be decently complicated. In your example with Roe v. Wade, to me, that's also how is the Supreme Court different from the presidency? Because they are just completely different.
Yeah. The president has very little power in all considered. Like, the president can do executive orders, but the executive orders are limited what they can do. It really relies on the House and the Senate to put forward bills that then get approved. Yeah.
Right. This is just a spurious thought on my own end. This might not stand to close scholarship, but I wonder if there's almost a correlation between implied concepts of the presidency as more of a unilateral dictator with an increase of both federal power and the power of the president. So as that becomes a conception, that becomes a factor in what we've seen of the kind of gradual rise in the power of the presidency and also of the federal government, basically over the last century and a half. That's a conversation to itself, but I just figured I would throw that out there. One specific group I wanted to ask about was the group we talked about last time, the group you did your PhD with, we'll call moderate conservatives or never Trumpers, people who have been more conservative, more right-leaning, and have historically been a part of the Republican Party, but have felt alienated from the Republican Party during the Donald Trump era of the Republican Party. What did you learn about them during this election? How did they fall demographically this time around?
It's interesting. I think the individuals, at least the ones that I spoke with and that I've continued to follow up with, still stand in the very anti-Trump camp. There is some sentiment, again, that they're not exactly happy with Biden, but very clearly Trump has turned them off strongly. And looking at some of the voters and some of the New York Times interviews, and I think some real additional research is going to need to be done, and that's kind of, I think, the next stage of my own research career. I've got a feeling that a lot of the shift that we saw was not former Republicans shifting back. There were some. I'm more thinking, I kind of almost think that some of it was actually those who more sat on the left may have shifted to the right. I think that there's a very good chance that either you're sort of classic middle of the road, flip-flopping back and forth. I think that the Democrats may have actually lost more of their constituents than the Republicans regained of theirs. And my basis for that is just going back to, again, the emotional feelings of Trump hurt a lot of these people emotionally. There were some that shifted, but a lot of them, especially the ones I spoke with, really shattered their core beliefs of what the Republican Party stood for and really made it difficult to reconcile that. Now, there are some that have shifted back. I think that especially the ones that voted for Trump realized that this was a horrible decision and shifted. Those ones have not shifted back. They may not have loved Harris, but they definitely preferred her over Trump. I think the Republicans gained some members of the Democratic Party that historically have voted Democrat and have realized that Democrats haven't done anything for them and see this as, let's give Trump a try again. Things weren't great when he was president, but I remember them as better than they are now.
I think in some ways that's even more surprising. I guess it makes sense from the never Trumpers, especially if they have a very visceral emotional reaction. I mean, that kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning, that the emotional and narratives are often what guide us. And people who have had this very strong emotional experience, they might not go back very easily. Why do you think this group on the more blue side made the shift to Donald Trump?
I think it goes back to what I was saying, that the Democrats have not delivered. The Democrats have said for years and years, we do this, and haven't done that. And I think that's what it was. And I think that the Democrats need to put their money where their mouth is, to say, in some sense, and actually deliver promises that they are keeping. Because I think that the trust has been broken, and people are saying, I might as well try someone like Trump because right now nothing is going well for me.
I have sensed some of that feeling and that sense of betrayal, or that sense of, sometimes the people I know, the people I talk to will articulate it as a type of hypocrisy of like, you advocated for this, I also find this important, some of the social issues and things like that, but your practice doesn't preach that. As a final question, you were talking about research you plan to do, but what are your biggest questions you have about regular people's concepts of politics?
So I think for me, my immediate question is looking to speak with voters who may have never voted Republican before, and so the opposite of who I've spoke with before and voted for Trump, or those who have now flip-flopped back to ask why. That's my question that I have for the immediate future, because I think once we know why they flip-flopped back, that'll give a better sense of what the Democrats really need to do to earn them back.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, thanks for taking the time, and I guess I wish you the best during this transitional period in U.S. politics.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.